We are in the midst of huge changes. Global downturn, a pandemic, oil price volatility, and a digital revolution. It will impact how we live our lives, how we run our businesses, and how we work. Johannes Wiik from Deloitte discussed this with a global expert from Singularity University and World Economic Forum, Mr. John Hagel.
So welcome, John, to us. Great to have you here. We're here to talk about the future work in the context of energy. And I have a very, very basic question at the beginning. I'm wondering, how do you define work, and what on earth is future work?
It's a very hot topic these days. Everyone's talking about it. And it covers very many different elements or dimensions, everything from automation to reskilling, to the gig economy, where you have more and more contract workers versus employees. But I think the interesting thing is very few people are really focused on what I view as the most fundamental question of all in the future of work, which is, what is work and what should it be? And I'm going to generalize at a high level, but I think in most large institutions today, work is tightly specified, highly standardized routine tasks. You have the process manual that tells you exactly what needs to be done when, by whom, and that's what work is. I think the interesting change that's emerging is that if that's what work is, actually computers can do that kind of work, and robots much more efficiently than human beings can. They don't get distracted, they don't get sick. And so the question on the table is, well, if technology is going to take more of that work, what happens to the people? And when I talk to executives about the future of work, again, I'm going to generalize, but commonly the questions that I get are, how quickly can I automate, and how many jobs can I eliminate? Because it's all about efficiency. It's all about getting, fewer, lowering your expense, your costs. And I think that the opportunity is actually to take the people that have been freed up from those routine tasks and redefine their work so that we're asking them to address unseen problems and opportunities to create more value in whatever part of the organization, wherever they are. Be alert to what are the opportunities and problems that could help us to create more value, and what are the approaches that we need to take to deliver that value. I think that's unleashing a significant opportunity to create much more value in companies in all parts of the business. So long bit of answer perhaps to the question, but I think that that's what work increasingly should be for human beings as those routine tasks get taken over by the machine.
It's interesting what you say, and I mean many people also. If you look at kind of the industrial age and the repetitive side of work, is it really human? So an interesting question for you is, do you see work as a positive development and the future work for us as human beings as well? Or how do you see that transition?
Yes, no, I think it's interesting. I gave a talk almost 10 years ago on how robots can restore our humanity, because again, it's this notion that the work that we're currently occupied with, and again, most institutions, most of the time, are these routine tasks. And we as humans are much more, our unique capabilities have to do with creativity, imagination, curiosity, and we're not harnessing that. And I think the opportunity is, as we redefine work, to really cultivate those capabilities and bring them out in people and make us feel like we're making more of a difference. We're doing things now that other people have not done and could not do. And so it's both to the benefit of the workers, but I think also to the benefit of the company, because if everybody's focused on how to create more value, the company will create more value at a rapid rate.
Exactly. Well, considering many of our, our audience working in the energy sector, and the energy sector is sort of going through a transition of its own. We see a lot of, pressure on from climate change, move towards renewables. There is new technology, Industry 4.0. Investor sentiment is changing. There are many things driving that. So why would future work and the concept of future work be important for these companies?
Well, I think certainly there are unique elements to this particular industry, but more generally, I think all companies in all industries are facing a world of accelerating change. Things are happening at a much more rapid rate, and uncertainty is increasing. And in that context, I think it puts more and more imperative on all of us to learn faster. Because if we're not learning faster in a world that's rapidly changing, we're going to get marginalized. And that notion of, when I talk about learning here, I'm not talking about training programs. I'm talking about learning in the work environment as you confront new situations and try to find new approaches to create more value. And that ties back to this other notion of what should work be. If we're focused on addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value, we're going to learn a lot faster because we're constantly trying to find ways to create more value. And I think it also helps to prepare workers for confronting unexpected situations. I mean, increasingly we're seeing that there are situations that the process manual didn't anticipate, and the workers are struggling to figure out, okay, how do I address this? And it's an opportunity to take these unexpected situations and again, create more value, find ways to really address them so that you're having more impact in whatever context that's relevant.
Well, when we look at, we kind of seen recent announcements from various energy companies and also supply companies, looking at, on the one hand, they're trying to maximize value from their existing business, while at the same time, trying to pivot into new areas. Where, well, to be fair, renewables is not necessarily the same high margin, say, as in oil and gas. So how do you kind of build that up and find new business models while at the same time driving your existing business models? And how would you, as a leader, go about doing that?
Well, I think the first challenge, and I think it's an issue for many leaders, is we are in a world of increasing uncertainty. And in that kind of world, our natural human instinct is to, well, let's do lots of initiatives and hope that one or two of them actually succeed, and that'll be our success. I think that the challenge with that is that if you do lots of initiatives, number one, you're spreading yourself way too thin across many different initiatives, so nothing really has critical mass or commitment to it. And then we also become complacent. If one of those initiatives isn't really succeeding, well, not a problem. We've got 20 others, so one of those others will succeed. And so I actually believe the more initiatives you have, the more risk you're taking. I'm a bit of a contrarian on this because everybody talks about portfolio approaches to reduce risk. But I think as the manager of a business, as the leader of a business, you need to focus. You need to really commit. Again, in a world of increasing pressure and change, if you're not committed and aggressively pursuing something, you're likely not to succeed. And so in that context, I've become a strong proponent of an approach to strategy that I call zoom out, zoom in, which is a notion of, as uncomfortable as it might be, looking ahead 10 to 20 years. That's the zoom out piece. and asking what is our market or industry likely to look like 10 to 20 years from now? And then what are the implications for the kind of business we're going to need to be successful in that market or industry? That's zoom out 10 to 20 years. Zoom in, very different horizon at 6 to 12 months. And on that horizon, the question is what are the 2 or 3 business initiatives, no more, that we could pursue in the next 6 to 12 months that would have the greatest impact in accelerating our movement towards this longer term opportunity? And do we have a critical mass of resources in the next 6 to 12 months against those 2 or 3 initiatives? So I think it's a powerful way to, first of all, develop a sense of focus and direction in terms of what's the big opportunity that really is emerging and that we could be addressing, and then focusing on action in the short term to say what could we and do we need to be doing to aggressively pursue that opportunity. And it's very much driven by a learning mindset. The companies that pursue this kind of strategy, and I'm very much influenced here, I'm based in Silicon Valley in the United States, and some of the most successful technology companies in Silicon Valley pursue this kind of strategy. And they have they're driven very much by a learning mindset. I mean, they're developing this view of the future, but they're not saying that's it, we're never going to question it, we're never going to revisit it. No, they're using the short-term initiatives to test and refine their view of what that big long-term opportunity could be and what is going to be required to address that opportunity. And they're constantly revisiting and reflecting on what impact did we achieve, how could we get even more impact, how could we refine our view of what that big opportunity really is. So I think that to me is one of the key issues, and certainly in an industry like the oil and gas or energy industry more broadly, that's going through major change, having that sense of direction is going to be, I believe, increasingly necessary to really focus the workers on what really matters.
And you talked about capabilities and learning. And when you look at some of the energy companies, you have a fairly long investment cycles. People have stayed in the industry for a long time. They developed capabilities, for understanding complex engineering problems. And suddenly, there is a need to pivot into new areas. How can you build new capabilities on the back of that, or should you? And how can you kind of transform larger corporations? Probably easier said than done.
Yeah, it's one of the key challenges, I think, of large established companies is how do we drive that process of change. And I've become a strong proponent of an approach to change that I call scaling the edge, which is rather than trying to get everybody in the organization to change what they're doing all at once, it's find an edge to the existing business that has the potential to scale to the point where it could become the new core of your business. And then focus on scaling that edge and driving the change in the edge so that you're really addressing this emerging opportunity in a more and more successful way. But I think that it helps to create some focus and to start with a small group of people that you really see as committed to and excited about this opportunity that they're going after, and keeping the most of the people in the organization, at least in the near term, focused on just delivering more value and impact in their current business. And so I think that it's on the side, scaling that edge, that will ultimately drive the change. And I should say, tie it back to the zoom out, zoom in. The zoom out approach for strategy helps to identify what a potential edge could be that could scale to become your new core. If you have that 10 to 20 year view, you can start to look at where could you start today to make some initiatives that would scale very rapidly given the broader changes in the market or industry. And then the zoom in initiatives give you the focus to say, okay, what can we do in the next 6 to 12 months to, as rapidly as possible, scale this edge? I should say, too, the other piece of the zoom in, I often, when I'm dealing with companies in this approach, I suggest that one of the zoom in initiatives should be identifying and starting to scale this edge that could become the new core. A second zoom in initiative is going back into the core of your business and asking, what is the one thing I could do in the next 6 to 12 months that would have the greatest impact in strengthening the existing core of my business? Because ultimately that's where the profits and money is today. And I want to prolong the life of the core as long as possible. And so, but having a very targeted area within the core to say, if I could really significantly improve performance here, it would have a big impact on the overall core. Now I've started to focus again in redefining work. Who are the workers in that area, and how could we refocus them on addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value? So I think, a key theme here is this notion of focus, not trying to do it for everybody all at once, but getting impact as quickly as possible.
If you could elaborate a little bit on what you mean by edge. I mean, we see companies are typically, in a corporate environment, you have a separate business unit, or you have, a separate entity that is given slightly more autonomy. But what do you mean by, in that context, where do you see successful edges, and how do you sort of manage them to make them successful?
Well, I think it's a good point. I mean, a lot of companies have, again, innovation centers or, as you said, separate entities. But the challenge for most of those is there's no commitment to make that the new core of the business. And ultimately, I think the key to success here is having a very senior executive, ideally the CEO, but if not that person, then somebody who reports to the CEO, who has both commitment and courage to scale that edge and make it the new core. They're not going to stop until it has become the new core of the company. It's not just a diversification initiative or a growth initiative or an innovation. It is going to be the new core, and that leader is going to do whatever they can to make it accelerate the scaling as quickly as possible. And then finding a leadership team on the edge that is really driven by that opportunity and inspired and wanting to take risk and be aggressive to scale that edge. That, to me, is the difference from a lot of these kinds of initiatives that large companies have today, where there's no commitment to make it the new core. And so I think that it takes many different forms. I give a quick example. It's not in the energy business, but a bank in the United States, State Street Bank, very old company, founded in the late 1700s. Most of their history, they were a traditional retail bank. They had branches, took deposits, gave out loans. In the mid-1970s, they started to see more pressure, margin pressure on the retail banking business. And one of their senior executives saw that in their back office, they had world-class transaction processing capability. And he said, what if we took that capability and rented it out to other financial institutions that are experiencing similar kind of margin pressure? Radical notion at the time, but they had some spare capacity, and he succeeded in convincing the rest of the management team to create this new business of renting out the capacity. It scaled at a dramatic rate, and today this company is now an outsourcing back office processing company for other financial institutions. Went through a fundamental transformation by scaling that edge, addressing a significant unmet need.
Slightly different topic. I read an interesting article about the value of oil and gas and energy companies in the S&P 500. And in the total, it constituted, say, if I remember correctly, 15 to 18% back in 2010, 12. And now it's about 2.5%. And the big sector gaining is the technology sector. And it seems like most industries are kind of taken over by technology one way or the other. And that creates very different dynamics. Like, it's no longer a company, it's, platforms, it's ecosystems, etc. How do you, if you were a leader in the energy sector, how would you think, in terms of understanding and learning, how will technology play an important part and maybe influence my business model moving forward?
Important question. I think that, first of all, I should say, just as background, that my father spent his career with Mobil Oil. So I have a background of a childhood history of the oil and gas industry. I think that certainly digital technology is going to play more and more of an important role, I think, in all business activities. And I would say that a couple of areas where I think there's opportunity. If you think about oil and gas, at the core, a lot of the business activity is around what I would call infrastructure management, managing asset-intensive infrastructure with high volume routine processing. It could be extraction, transportation, processing, but it's asset-intensive infrastructure facilities. And there's an opportunity, I think, to take that expertise and capability and apply it not just to oil and gas, but into other areas where there's similar extraction activities, any kind of natural resource. And in that context, I think the large-scale facilities increasingly are going to benefit from having digital infrastructure that can, again, enhance the efficiency of those operations, where you're taking more and more of the tasks and automating the activity. But I think, to your point about ecosystems and platforms, one of the key opportunities here is, in terms of finding ways to create more value, is the concept of leverage. And I will say that all companies today are under increasing pressure for growth. Investors want more growth. And yet, when I sit in discussions of growth strategy with leadership, typically the discussion focuses on two options. It's either make or buy. You either grow organically, you develop it internally, or you go out and do a big acquisition. Those are the ways to grow. Increasingly, my view is that there is a third path to growth that I call leveraged growth, which is, how do you understand the needs of your customers in ways where you can start to connect with and mobilize more and more third parties to address those needs, rather than trying to do it all yourself. Become an orchestrator of a growing ecosystem of third parties that can deliver more and more value to your customers, and take a portion of that value for yourself as for having provided that service of orchestration. And so I think that's a big untapped opportunity, where clearly digital technology can be extremely helpful in scaling the number of participants that you can mobilize to serve the needs of your customer. And I'll say too that another area where I think ecosystems and platforms become really central and valuable is this notion of, rather than thinking about the ecosystem in a transactional term of just, somebody out there has some expertise or resource that I need, or my customer needs, I'll just connect them, do the deal, and deal done. Think about the ecosystem in a more dynamic way, as an opportunity to build trust-based relationships across a larger and larger number of participants where they can all learn faster together as they try to address customer needs and see what the unmet needs are, where they can work together and problem solve to see how to create even more value so that they can serve the customer better. And I think that kind of ecosystem is ultimately going to be the one that's most successful and will certainly prevail over the more narrowly defined transactional ecosystems that we have today. And in that context, I think the whole notion of platforms, if you look at platforms today, they tend to be very transactional. It's just connecting buyers and sellers, or just connecting people so that they can stay in touch with their relatives or their friends. No, my belief is the big untapped opportunity here is to create what I call learning platforms, where you're explicitly designing the platform to bring more and more participants together so that they can learn faster together. And that again ties back to this whole future of work and the notion of accelerating learning and scaling that learning. Those are the companies that ultimately I think are going to create the most value.
Yeah, I really like your thought there. And if you look at the current platforms that are successful in the consumer side, it's almost like a winner takes all for many of those. They're global companies, they're taking over sector for sector. Amazon is a great example, of course. But in this context, when you take kind of an industrial context, that's a consumer market. How do you see this play out? You know, will there be a winner takes all? Will it be, you know, multiple platforms interacting? Any perspective on that?
Oh, yes. No, I think that there's certainly a lot of opportunity for change and evolution. I think I'll just give one example of a business-to-business platform, that an ecosystem that illustrates the potential. It's actually driven by a Chinese company called Li and Feng, and they're in the clothing and apparel industry. They basically, their customers are apparel designers, all the brand names that we know and love. They will help those apparel designers connect with a global network of providers who can help everything from sourcing of raw material through the production stages of the production process, delivery anywhere in the world. They have 15,000 partners in their network today. And it's a global network, even though they're a Chinese company. The vast majority of their partners are from other parts of the world. But I think what's interesting about this network is that I've done a lot of research on them, and I went out and interviewed many of the participants in their network, and I asked, why are you part of the Li and Feng network? And without exception, the answer I got was, well, because we learn faster as part of the Li and Feng network than we ever could on our own or as part of anyone else's network. And so I think it's an interesting illustration. These are one of the few companies I think that is really focused on how do we build a set of relationships with our third parties where everybody's going to learn faster together. And yes, there is at one level a winner take all, in the sense that the more participants you get in that kind of network, the harder it is for other networks to compete. So over time, there will be relatively few global networks of that type. But I think if you're really focused on learning, you're going to be serving the needs and interests of a growing number of participants on the platform. They will benefit from participation on the platform, as well as the platform owner benefiting from the scale that they've achieved. So I think it's ultimately a balancing act. And how do you build trust with the participants? Because if you don't have that trust, you're not going to get them to collaborate in a learning fashion. And so if you're using the platform to just squeeze people and marginalize them, it's not going to be a learning platform, and it'll be relatively short-lived, because the platforms and ecosystems that are going to thrive in this changing world are ones that really build trust and accelerate learning among the participants.
Thank you. I really like the positive sense of the opportunity you're describing there. And but changing slightly the topic again, I talked to we talked to Ramez Naam just before the summer, discussing the impact of COVID-19 on energy transition, and he described it like a dry run of what's to come. How would you describe the COVID-19 pandemic in the context of future work? What lessons and what did we see in the crystal ball based on what's going on and what has happened?
Well, I think that certainly it's interesting and challenging on many levels. I think it illustrates the downside, if you will, or the challenge of all this connectivity we've created on a global scale. At one level, that benefits us enormously because we can connect and access resources and learn faster everywhere in the world. On the other side, negative events like viruses spread much more rapidly than they ever would have in the past. And so it's the positive and the negative of connectivity. But it illustrates the fact that I certainly don't view the COVID virus as a one-time only event. I think it's an illustration of, again, an increasing number of extreme events, both positive and negative, that are going to create more and more uncertainty in the world. And it illustrates, hopefully, the message we take from it is the companies that are most successful and effective in this challenging environment are the companies where the workers are improvising. They're confronting a situation where they've never confronted before, and they're improvising to figure out how do we continue to create value in this very different environment. And so hopefully it drives home the notion that in these environments, that new notion of work, of addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value, improvisation becomes critical to success. And as a result, learning faster. The challenge is things are happening at a very rapid rate. And if we're not learning faster, we are going to be increasingly challenged.
So thank you very much, John. You've certainly given me and hopefully more people in the audience a new perspective on what we think about the future work and the possibilities that lie in the concept of future work. So thank you very much. And maybe we should invite in the others to come back from backstage.
Excellent. Thank you.